welcome Dr. Danica Love Brown. She's a citizen of the Choctaw Nation. I'm sorry, I keep mispronouncing it now that I've heard you say it. I'm so sorry. It's Danica Love Brown. She's a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, born and raised in northern New Mexico, and she is the Behavioral Health Manager at Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board and has worked as a mental health and substance abuse counselor, social worker, and youth advocate for 20 years. Danica's research has focused on indigenous ways of knowing and decolonizing methodologies to address historical trauma and health disparities in tribal communities. And she loves puppies. So that's a really wonderful, great, helpful thing for us to get to know you better. Thank you for sharing that as a part of your bio. And we also have Dr. Wendy Gardner. Dr. Gardner is a member of the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohican Indians. She's a public health professional and clinician, and in 2019, Wendy founded Good Medicine Tribal Public Health Consulting Services to support tribes and their allies in promoting tribal health and healthcare across a wide array of topical areas, including prevention, treating substance use disorders, healing trauma, and promoting indigenous resiliency. Good Medicine donates 7% of its resources to growing the next generation of Native public health professionals and tribal nations in need of support but lacking resources. So I'm really grateful to Wendy and Danica for joining us and sharing your experiences with us. And we're just really grateful to have more hope and exciting things happening with the way treatment is taking place for young Native people, and I want to pass things over to you at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Wendy Gardner, and I'm a member of the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohican Indians. We are the people where the water never stops flowing. And today, Danica Love Brown and I are going to be talking to you about trauma, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and their impacts on the health and well-being of Native people. We're also going to discuss how we can build resilience in ourselves and in our communities. And we're going to talk with you about an intervention that Danica and I are working on to help heal trauma in Native people. And I just wanted to say before we get started that, talking about trauma can be hard for many of us. So if you notice that you're starting to have an emotional response to the content, just feel free to take a moment to do some self-care. Just know that, you're not alone in your reactions and that others might be experiencing what you're experiencing as well. So kind of on that note, we're going to extend our time for questions and processing at the end for anyone who's interested. Plus, we'll both be available by email and phone after the session. So Danica, if you can take a moment to describe yourself or introduce yourself, that would be good.
Hello, halato atishio chaluba onhili Fijik. I'm Danica. I'm a Choctaw of the White Crane Clan, and I'm Scottish of Clan Ross. And I was born and raised in northern New Mexico in a little village called Chimayo. And I am currently the Behavioral Health Manager for the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. And a lot of the work that I do is around the tribal opioid response, with working with tribal communities to address the impact of the opioid epidemic. I also work on the Behavioral Health Aid Project, which is a project to develop behavioral health aids in tribal communities. And then I work on the 49 Days of Ceremony project, which we will be talking about later in this presentation. I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm, like Wendy shared, open and available after this presentation or via email for further conversation or talking about today's subject. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Like I said, my name is Wendy, and about a year ago, I started an organization it's called Good Medicine, to promote tribal public health and healthcare. And through this work, I've gotten a chance to work with a lot of really bright Native people, and I've learned a lot from them. And Donica is one of these people. So today, we're going to do our best to share information on this topic, and we hope that you share your knowledge as well throughout. So just as some kind of housekeeping, please know that we're going to accept questions throughout the presentation. So please just raise your hand or send a chat, and we'll do our best to respond. Okay, let's get started. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to provide a brief overview of trauma, what it is, and people's common responses to trauma. We're also going to share information about adverse childhood experiences, also called ACEs, and discuss the important health implications of these experiences. Plus, we're going to talk about Indigenous resilience and the intervention that Donica and I are working on, which is an intertribal, intergenerational team to heal trauma called 49 Days of Ceremony. So, what is trauma? Trauma, broadly defined, is an event or a series of events that causes moderate to severe stress reactions. And Donica is going to talk in a bit about what those reactions can look and feel like for us. So, as the definition on the last slide suggests, trauma can be either a single event, like being in a car accident, or witnessing some violent act like a robbery. But more commonly, though, trauma is caused by multiple events that occur over a period of time, like abuse or neglect or war, or living through a natural or man-made disaster. Traumatic events are often characterized by a sense of feeling fear, a sense of helplessness, and a threat to either our feeling safe bodily. It could be a threat of serious injury or death. So Donica, can you talk about the types of trauma?
Yeah, so there's different kinds of trauma, and I'm not going to go into detail about all of these, but just to kind of understand some of what trauma causes. There's acute trauma, which kind of happens acutely with one single event. And then there's repetitive trauma that happens after multiple events that can happen. One of the most complicated forms of trauma to understand is what is understood as complex trauma. Complex trauma describes both a child's exposure to multiple traumatic events, often of an evasive interpersonal nature, and the wide-ranging long-term effects of that exposure. These events are severe and pervasive, such as abuse or profound neglect. They usually occur in early childhood life and can disrupt many aspects of a child's development and their formation of self. And that's a really important part of complex trauma to understand, is that it really impacts the way that we view ourselves. Since these events often occur with a caregiver or a person of trust, they interfere with the child's ability to form secure attachment. Many aspects of a child's healthy physical and mental development rely on this primary source of safety and stability. And so when we see people who are experiencing complex trauma, we see that it impacts them throughout their lifespan. Another form of trauma is what we refer to as developmental trauma. And developmental trauma is a term used in the literature to describe early childhood trauma, such as also connected to child abuse and neglect. This trauma usually happens between the ages of 0 and 5, and it's not connected to language, and thus becomes fairly complicated to address later on in life. And then there's vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is what a lot of caregivers experience in their lives. People who do social work or public health, and it's also referred to as secondary trauma. And it's emotional residue of exposure that a lot of caregivers have from working with people when they're hearing their trauma stories and become witness to their pain, fear, terror, and that trauma survivors have endured. So but it's important to not confuse or conflate vicarious trauma with burnout. And then there's historical trauma, and I'll kind of go into historical trauma a little bit later in this presentation.
So, why is trauma so important when we're talking about Native people? Well, we know that Native kids are at 2 to 3 times greater risk for experiencing trauma than the general population. And we know that this trauma can have long-term impacts on our health. But how did we learn that traumas experienced during our childhood could have impacts on our health into adulthood? Well, there was a landmark study that was conducted in the mid-90s, and it was done on the effects of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, on an individual's health into their adulthood. So this particular study was conducted by the Division of Violence Prevention at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and it was done in partnership with Kaiser Permanente. It was a really big study. They had over 17,000 participants. And one of the things that they found was that ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences, are actually pretty common. For example, 28% of people reported physical abuse and 21% reported sexual abuse. Many people also reported experiencing a divorce or a parental separation when they were kids, or having a parent with a mental or substance use disorder, which are all ACEs as well. And one of the other interesting things that they found from this study was that ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, have a dose-response relationship with many health problems. So what that means is that as a person's cumulative ACEs score goes up, so the more adverse childhood experiences they have, so too does their risk for developing certain health conditions like diabetes, anxiety, depression, and substance use disorders. So ACEs have a strong relationship with health, social, and behavioral problems throughout a person's lifespan. Now, just so that we're all really clear about how they define adverse childhood experiences, so in this landmark study that we were talking about, and now how we continue to define ACEs, are potentially traumatic events that happen in childhood, so when we're born to all the way up until we're 17 years old. And some examples of adverse childhood experiences are experiencing violence or abuse, witnessing violence in the home or in the community, and having a family member die or attempt suicide. ACEs also include aspects of a child's environment that can impact their sense of safety, their stability, and their ability to bond, like growing up in a household with substance misuse, mental health problems, instability due to parental separation. And one of the things that this study saw was that adverse childhood experiences are linked to chronic health problems like mental illness and substance use. And another way to think about this relationship between the number of ACEs someone experiences and the potential health outcomes. So if you look at this triangle, so as a person has more ACEs, the higher up on the triangle we go. So maybe if a person has experienced 2 ACEs, this might impact their neurodevelopment, that second level. So maybe they have difficulty learning, whereas someone with more ACEs who's suffered abuse and neglect, we might see, for example, kind of higher up that they adopt more risky health behaviors and that they have an increased risk for developing, for example, diabetes. Then someone with even higher ACEs score who suffers severe chronic neglect may die, which is the top of the triangle. Now, there's a group of researchers from the Department of Health and Human Services who gathered up data from the National Survey on Children's Health. And this was they took data from 2011 to 2012 and crunched these numbers. And what they found was that on average, Native people experience more ACEs than the general population. So whereas, we can look at this data below. So whereas only 21% of kids in the general population experience 2 or more adverse childhood experiences, 40.3% of Native kids experience 2 or more ACEs. And whereas only 11.5% of the general population experience 3 or more ACEs, almost 27% of Native kids experience 3 or more. But so what? Well, like we've talked about, this has a significant impact on our health. And that because American Indian Alaska Native kids are more likely to experience multiple adverse events as they develop, we see that American Indian Alaska Native adults are at higher risk than the general population for developing chronic health problems like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, depression, anxiety, and substance use.
In addition to adverse childhood experiences, another form of trauma that impacts the health of American Indian Alaskan people is historical trauma. Historical trauma results from the long-term effects of the oppressive, traumatizing policies, attitudes, beliefs of the colonizer towards American Indian Alaska Native people. The lack of resources and opportunities for American Indian Alaska people, Alaska Native people. And then this also is compounded by the current treatment of American Indian Alaska people in this country. Maria Braveheart Yellowhorse defines historical trauma as a cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations emanating from massive group trauma. Dr. Eduardo Duran refers to this as soul wounding. These soul wounding symptoms of historical loss are interconnected, each one affecting the other in varying degrees. Historical trauma can often produce complex and profound individual and collective biopsychosocial, cultural, spiritual responses related to significant health disparities. There's a direct connection between colonization and the effects of historical trauma, depression, substance misuse, suicidal ideation, and other risk factors. The negative impact of broad social factors that have been influenced by colonization, such as racism, acculturation, poverty, are then translated into everyday physical and emotional distress experienced by American Indians and Alaskan Natives. Historical trauma response is a constellation of these features in relation to massive group trauma, which includes historical unresolved grief, similar to child of survivors in complex trauma that were seen in the Jewish Holocaust survivors and descendants of the Japanese American internment camps.
So,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. I don't mind talking about this.
No, you go.
So, intergenerational trauma is another type of trauma that is experienced by Native people. And intergenerational trauma occurs when responses to trauma are passed down from one generation to the next. And the next generation often displays similar physical and psychological symptoms as the past generations. And we actually know from the science of epigenetics that chronic trauma can actually mutate our genes, and that the mutation can result in an overactivation of our stress response system, and that this mutation in the genes can get passed down across generations, such that the traumas of our ancestors can become our traumas to bear. However, positive experiences seem to be able to correct this. So there is hope, and we're going to talk about this more in a bit.
So what does all this mean? So what our bodies are designed to remember danger. Our bodies, our brains are these amazing things. And part of it is that we each start creating a database of threats in the environment. And then in our limbic system, in that really ancient old part of our brain, we also collectively carry ancestral memories. There's a reason why, like for instance, I'm terrified of snakes, never been bitten by a snake. I have no kind of memory of ever being bitten by a snake, but I'm terrified of snakes. Where does that memory come from? That's a kind of an ancestral memory that's been passed down from generation to generation. But our bodies are collecting, our minds are collecting these memories over and over. And then we create these ancient survival responses that help us to survive. And we commonly know these as fight, flight, or freeze. And then there's a new kind of understanding of a response that we have called fawning. So fight is a hypervigilance on a conscious or unconscious level that prepares us to attack. Flooding of a psychological changes related to aggression. Flight, the blood flows to the limbs, preparing us to run. Flight is often thwarted, giving no relief or outlet to our prime nervous systems. And this kind of presents itself as avoidance, disassociation, hiding, and other psychological flight behaviors can also become then disruptive. Freeze is a response a lot of times we see in animals like possums, and they're accompanied by a slow shutdown of metabolism. This can also be learned response in attempt to remain safe and invisible, paralyzing the victim or survivor, and actually making us more vulnerable and reinforcing helplessness in each new situation. Fawning, in a nutshell, is used, manifests itself in a form of people pleasing to diffuse conflict. To feel more secure in the relationship, to earn the approval of others. It can become maladaptive in a way of creating safety in our connections with others by essentially mirroring the imaging and expectation and desires of other people. We see this a lot with people who are in interpersonal violence relationships, where we will make sure that everything's perfect and okay so that the perpetrator will not, assault us or create a space that's unsafe. So what happens is when we're in crisis activates the limbic system, which, like I said, is that old part of our brain, to kick in our survival system. So lots of hormones are flooding into our brain and our nervous systems, and then our memory systems start kicking in and looking into those memory systems to see what our response should be. So, for example, right now we're living in a pandemic, and so because most of us have not survived or lived through a pandemic is not registered in our memory systems. So our survival systems don't know whether to pick fight, flight, or freeze. So currently our brain cycles through all of them, trying to decide which is most beneficial and what's going to help us to be able to survive. This is why we find ourselves moving through lots of responses and feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about our own reactions. Normally, our systems will pick a system and go to that system as a go-to. So for me, like, I understand that my go-to survival response system is I'm a flighter. I like to run. I'm looking for the exit and I'm ready to move in an instant. So part of me is I understand that that's my primary survival system. And when I'm in a situation, I can assess what that is and then learn how to respond in a more appropriate way than just running from the situation. My kind of next go-to response is I'm a flighter or a fighter. So I'm gonna like kind of dig in, pull up my boots, and just like go to it. And then my final kind of response is I'm a pleaser. I will try to make sure that everyone is happy and content and comfortable. But we all have different ways that those kind of process and go through in our survival systems. So, there are initial reactions to trauma, and the way that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn kind of, the way that we have a reaction to that is that it can cause exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, agitation, numbness, confusion, as well as physical arousal. And most of these responses are normal, and that they affect us and are socially acceptable. It's when they become the only tools that we have that they can then become dysfunctional or inappropriate in our survival responses. And then that can create other issues that impact us. We can then have cognitive errors. We can have just expressive, or we experience inappropriate guilt, or we'll idolize the person who might be abusing us. We can even have trauma-induced hallucinations or delusions, and intrusive thoughts and memories. So cognitive errors are misinterpreting a current situation as dangerous because it resembles even remotely the previous trauma. And so sometimes, we might, like, for whatever reason, we're in a situation, we become kind of like moved, we don't understand what's going on. We're going to have what has normally been called a trigger. And then we start responding to those situations in ways that might not be appropriate. And that is a lot of times when we're working with people who are dealing with complex trauma in particular, they don't understand what's going on. They're just responding to the situation. And that response tends to be very exaggerated and inappropriate.
But don't despair. There's hope, because we know that trauma reactions may occur when there's a perceived or an actual threat. But we also know that people often experience the exact same event and react very differently. Where one person might be traumatized, others are able to demonstrate greater resilience. In other words, it's not the traumatic event itself that causes humans distress, but rather it's our reactions to the traumatic event. So, fortunately, Indigenous communities, we have unique protective factors that we can draw on as strengths to overcome these experiences of trauma. In thinking about building resilience in ourselves and in others, it's important to draw on these protective factors. Studies have found that protective factors for Native communities promote resilience, including participating in cultural traditions, for example, participating in traditional activities, spiritual practices, and cultivating a positive sense of Native identity. In addition, practicing traditional Indigenous knowledge about health and wellness has been shown to positively impact resilience. In addition, connecting to community, being part of an extended family and clan is important, as is fostering a sense of interdependence, such as a feeling of connectedness between people, between Mother Earth and nature.
So I have an elder that I grew up with who was from the Taos Pueblo Reservation. His name was Little Joe Gomez. And one of the things that he always told me was that the memories of our ancestors are passed down on our blood. And, you know, I think what he was talking about was our understanding of the epigenetic transfer of trauma. But what he was also talking about was that the ancestral wisdom of our ancestors is also passed down on our blood. And that we not only hold, you know, the traumatic memories, but we also hold those ancestral knowledge and that ancestral wisdom. And we can heal our communities through culture, connection, and developing intervention and policies that are grounded in traditional Indigenous knowledge, tribal best practices, and evidence-based practices. This is not just true in the case of substance use disorders, but all other health conditions as well. But a lot of times when we talk about trauma, kind of the impetus on healing trauma is put on the individual. And within Indigenous communities, we understand that it's not just about individual care, it's about community care, it's collective care. There's also a responsibility that we heal ourselves, yes, but we as a community support and cultivate an environment that can also be healing. And consequently, we need a broader political understanding that we need policies and resources put in place so that people who are experiencing trauma and historical trauma are getting their needs met so that they can do that kind of collective healing with each other, not individually. And I think that that's a different way of understanding our collective and individual healing and transformation of trauma is a collective experience. And so I think it's just important to remember that human beings are amazing. We have an amazing body. Our brains, what we understand now, are plastic and always growing and developing throughout our lifespan. We are resilient. Our brains are resilient. We are always healing. And some circuits of our brains are developing throughout our lifespans until the day that we die. And we need to be patient with science. What we understand about our brain, um, about the impact of trauma on our bodies and on our brains, we're just starting to understand what that means. And so we need to be patient with science, especially Western science, and be open to new ideas and thoughts about what healing means and what that looks like, especially within a collective experience of healing. But a big part of healing the brain and trauma is bringing the limbic system back into health, and communicating and developing a communication with the cerebral cortex, which is where our memories are held. So a lot of what that actually looks like is through mindfulness, through meditation, through prayer, through ritual, and through ceremony. So when my grandfather would say that the memories of our ancestors are passed down on our blood, he would also, I interpret that, how do we listen to those memories? How do we access that knowledge? And we do that through, through prayerful thought, through meditation, through silence, through listening to our ancestors and to our original stories and creation stories. But to do that through a process of ritual and prayer and meditation, or however you want to call it. There's a lot of research now around prayer and meditation, and so I think that those are the ways that we access that historical memory. And so there's a lot of things that we can learn about and understand about trauma. And so a big part of the way that we can support people who are experiencing trauma is to provide that message of hope, to let them know that they're not alone, they're not at fault, that recovery, that healing is possible, and that it can be anticipated. Trauma, we need to understand that trauma is something that happens to us. It's not who we are. It doesn't change the way that we are. It's something that happens. And so an important message for people to hear is that trauma is a normal response to an extraordinary situation or circumstance. And so we need to reframe people's experiences and help them understand that and communicate that this is a normal process of for us to survive whatever the traumatic event is. And the other thing is that we need to discuss traumatic stress symptoms with the people that we're working with. I think there's sometimes this thought that we don't want to go back and relive the traumatic experience. And in some cases that's true, especially with sexual assault or physical assault. We don't really need to relive the experience, but we need to be able to talk about the symptoms in a way with the people that we're serving, so that they understand the link between the traumatic stress symptoms and the health disparities that they're experiencing. And like I said, again, normalizing trauma experiences, explaining to the people that we're serving that their symptoms are not a sign of weakness or a character flaw, but actually a sign of our strength and resiliency.
Donica, we have a really good thought that Juliana just posted. She said, our clinic encounters many Dene clients who have rejected their tribal cultural heritage in the name of Christianity. I have respectfully tried to encourage clients to reconnect with their traditions, especially because some of the historical trauma was done in the name of religion. I would like to hear suggestions about how to respectfully help clients heal without imposing any religious or cultural judgment or undue influence.
That's a really amazing question, and one of the kind of things that I've I've kind of tried to deal with in my own life. I'm Choctaw, and when I was doing my dissertation work, I worked with my tribe, and we developed a healing project called the Yapali Project, where we rewalked the Trail of Tears with Choctaw women. And the Choctaw Nation is a Christian nation, and I really was kind of like struggling with like this balance between like connecting back with like this traditional experience and rewalking the Trail of Tears and the impact of Christianity on that. And I think that people are on a very different path, and it's important to understand that, and that for me, in that struggle, what I think was important was to meet people where they're at, and offer um, opportunities or resources to them without judgment. And so that that includes wherever they are in their path with their own spiritual experience, but just offering different opportunities or thoughts about what traditional medicine can mean, and what ritual does that mean. And what we would do is every morning we would do a ceremony um, in the morning, and do a ceremony in the evening. And it wasn't ever required that the women participate, because many of them identified with Southern Baptist Christianity, but just offering them a space if they wanted to participate or not. And what we found is, because the journey was a 9-day journey, was in the beginning, many of the women just kind of stood around and observed the ceremony, but throughout the week, by the end of the week, they were participating in that. But there is a lot of research that we can lean to and glean to. Michael Yellowbird has done some work around kind of indigenizing or decolonizing mindfulness, which is an Eastern practice. And so just maybe looking at that as a lesson of how we can reframe what mindfulness is, what prayer is, what ritual is. Prayer, in whatever form or whatever way that you do it, has the same effect. It's a form of mindfulness. It actually is a way for that limbic system and the frontal cortex to communicate when we practice like mindfulness or ritual or prayer. And so it's like, instead of trying to give a specific tool, it's understanding the purpose and broader implications of ritual and prayer and what that means for people. I hope that answers the question. So I'm going to move on. There's a lot of research around kind of what works and with with treatment, and I'm kind of moving into that discussion right now. What we need are people who are fluent in many different theories and models of treatment. It's really important to be client-centered and counselor-driven, and focusing on strengths and protective factors, and developing therapeutic relationships. When we're dealing with people who are suffering from trauma, this is really, really important. But it's also important that we work within our area of expertise. And then there's a whole burgeoning area of research and work that shows that culture is prevention, and culture is healing, and it is and can impact the way that we heal. And so that's why we're going to talk a little bit more about the work that we have been doing around the 49 days of ceremony. And when we develop a resilient response to dealing with and healing trauma, we find that many people find healthy ways to cope with, respond to, and heal from trauma. Often people automatically reevaluate their values and define what is important to them after a traumatic event. And so some of these resilient responses include increasing bonding with family and community, redefining a sense of purpose and meaning in our lives, a renewed commitment to a personal mission, revising our priorities, and increasing kind of our giving and engaging in our community and a connection to our culture. And so a lot of this came kind of speaks to the work that we're doing in the 49 days of ceremony. But I'll let Wendy kind of take the lead on this.
Sure. So, we're both Danica and I, and actually all of our team, we are working on how we talk about this because 49 days of ceremony is really in development right now. But, we've been working to develop an intervention for American Indian Alaska Native communities to mitigate the effects of these early adverse experiences as a result of trauma and other adversities. And the primary goal of the 49 days of ceremony model is to awaken one's will in becoming a full human being and living a full life. And we're doing this by integrating in American Indian Alaska Native practices of gaining knowledge through experiential learning. So we want the curriculum to serve as a guide for addressing health and wellness in a holistic way. And lessons are going to develop on and a focus on kind of the preparation for an event or activity, the journey of doing that event or activity, and then have time for reflection and prayer. And that, I'm going to just go ahead here. This is our team. This is the 49 Days of Ceremony team. And we are an intergenerational, intertribal group of individuals. And, we've got folks that are from Alaska. We've got folks that are from the Southwest, Midwest, Austria. And, the elder, let me move ahead here. Here are two elders, Doug and Amy Modig, and they've worked in substance use disorders and helping people heal for a couple of decades now. And really, the idea for 49 Days of Ceremony came to Doug through prayer and reflection. And we're all working together as a team to help it come to life. And so I was wondering, Danica, can you talk a little bit about the model that we've started to develop?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. Sherry Holland made a comment in the thread that says, I recently participated in a group on spirituality in the clinic in which I am studying. Overall truth has understood to be the human need for connection, to bring some outside self to be known and to find meaning. Universal human needs to be known, understood, loved was the conclusion of the session. And I think that statement is really kind of what we're trying to get to in the 49 Days of Ceremony framework is what does it mean to be a good human being, to be a full and well human being? And we lean towards this kind of historical understanding of the medicine wheel and the connection between our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual connection to self. But it's also in relationship to Father Sky, which is our kind of ancestral wisdom on our tribal truths and like that ancestral wisdom that's passed down since generation to generation. And then our relationship to Mother Earth and our connection to not only the earth and the resources, but each other as community. And that volition is kind of at the center of this. And we've been kind of going back around kind of language around volition or the will and looking towards kind of more indigenous understanding of what that is. but it's really about awakening the will, which is not in a Western kind of context is like an individual experience. Like free will is just the kind of individual experience. But within an indigenous perspective, it's a communal experience. You have to have a community around you who share with you about your roles and responsibilities, and you have a connection and a responsibility to your community, versus a kind of universal experience. And so, and all of these things are interrelated and interconnected, and they're not compartmentalized. And so the 49 days of ceremony is really around how do we collectively awaken the will of people in our communities so that we can be full and productive, well-balanced human beings. And so there's a kind of different, some of the other framework of understanding this is that we have our internal volition and the awakening of the will within the context of the community, and that the community it's not just around, it's around this unity and understanding and developing each other and developing that our youth to come up into these spaces, and that it's also in relationship to our environment and to our humanity. Wendy, did you want to add anything?
No, but just kind of like wanting to reiterate that, this is something that's still in the development, and that, like I said, our plan is to create this experiential learning tool to help heal Native people's trauma, and that we're going to develop lessons around these 7 aspects that we talked about, the 7 aspects of being a whole human being. And we're going to focus on the preparation for each experience, the journey, and then the prayer and reflection throughout when the experience is over. And then once the curriculum is drafted, we're going to pilot test it with 3 communities in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. And then we're going to focus on making adaptations based on, what the community's feedback is. And so, I guess, Danica, unless there was something more that you wanted to talk about with the 49 days, we were going to open up things for questions and processing.
Thank you so much, Danica and Wendy. It's a wonderful presentation. I'm really excited about this curriculum that you're working on, and I hope that when it's ready, you'll let us share it with our listeners as well. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of people interested in that.
We will. And actually, we have a question right now. How will the communities be chosen for the 49 days pilot testing? And maybe Danica can speak a little bit more to that.
So for next year, we are still in the process of developing the curriculum, and but so for next year, we're going to do some focus groups, one in Alaska and one in the Pacific Northwest, to kind of present the model and to get some feedback. And then the following years, we will probably also pick an initial pilot of that in Alaska, one in Oregon and one in Washington, primarily because of our service area and focusing on that. And then in later subsequent years, rolling out to other tribal communities in the lower 48 as well as in Alaska. So right now, we have looked at a couple of different communities in Alaska. We'll continue to develop those relationships and then kind of roll it out through the evaluation process through the lower 48.
We have another really great question from Jacqueline. She says, will 49 days of ceremony be adaptive adaptable to be virtual. And yes, that is something that we're talking about right now, especially with this time that we're in. The importance of having an intervention that can be utilized virtually, potentially, also in person. Yeah, and these are issues that we're talking about right now because we haven't started to develop it quite yet. And it's something that we're going to continue to talk with communities about as we do groups. In person or virtual focus groups. Oh, Melody says we're also working on a similar approach and application. Melody, is it possible for you to talk a little bit about that? Can we unmute Melody, Kate?
Yeah, I can try to do that here. One
Okay.
second.
I'm going to let you work the technology. So it's Melody Wynn.
So Melody, if you want to connect your audio, you should have the option now. You can go up to the little phone icon and click connect audio, and then choose your computer's microphone and speakers.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm in Spokane country in northeastern Washington, and the Empire Health Foundation, which is a nonprofit philanthropic foundation here in the city, brought together tribal health leaders from the region a few years ago, and they met for about a year. And after a year of talking about what they needed, they decided that they wanted what they're calling an integrated cultural treatment model. And so they brought some of us together from the 3 tribes in the area to create that. And so we held 4 2-day retreat sessions with elders from the 3 tribes, and then we got busy looking at all that material, which was a lot, and trying to figure out how to incorporate that into what they told us is health and well-being. And so we've been working on that. We're getting pretty close to being done. I envy that you have a pilot project already. That's what we're working on, how to find out, figure out a place to do the pilot project. And I really like the question about, can this be made virtual because of, the time we're in right now. And if we had a pilot project ready, we would have to do it virtually or in a small group or something to stay safe and keep our elders safe. But yeah, I'm really interested in what you guys have created in that 49 days of healing also.
I put my email in the chat. If you could email me, I would love to connect with you. And yeah, that would
All
be
right,
great.
I will email you.
Yeah, I put mine in there too. That would be wonderful.
I'll put mine in also.
Sadell Harrison has a question that says, I'm curious whether you have an advisory board for the development of this program. And yeah, this is essentially our advisory board at this point. And then in later, kind of when we start doing an evaluative process, we will expand the advisory board on that to include tribes from the Pacific Northwest.
Does anybody want to share kind of any additional questions or thoughts that were bubbling up while either we were presenting or Dr. Boyd was presenting? We've got some space and time to talk about these things, which is really wonderful. Thank you to Kate and everyone who is allowing us to keep this room open a little bit longer. But either just raise your hand or put a chat in the little chat box, and we can unmute you. Daniel Scott raised their hand.
Yep. So, yeah, Danielle, if you have a microphone, you should be able to connect that now.
This is Danielle.
Is that you?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Hi.
Hi. So one thing that I wanted to comment on, I do a lot of work. This is one of the main focus of my job as an extension educator for the University of Idaho. I work with the Nez Perce tribe in north central Idaho. What I brought to the table to this job is a lot of research in adverse childhood experiences and better understanding intergenerational and historical trauma. The Nez Perce tribe is on Fort Lapley, which holds a lot of historical trauma. The buildings are still there. The ground is still alive with the trauma. So I've really tried to work to build an understanding of what has happened, but we are resilient, obviously, because we're still here, we're still prospering. I was just wondering, what advice do you have to help other communities understand the historical trauma within their own communities to heal from that? Because I've found that a lot of people are not ready to rip off that band-aid and start the healing process, or how or who should do it. So I was just wondering if you have any advice on how to continue to move forward to address those issues for healing.
Yeah, I think that is a really, really important question and comment, because, we as tribal communities are, again, on a kind of continuum of change. And some of us, some tribal communities are really ready to like dig in and really look at and heal the trauma that happened within our communities. And some tribes are saying like that happened in the past, we just need to move forward and not dig up all those old wounds. And what we do know is that the healing of trauma, historical of otherwise, is you can't ignore it. You can't pretend it didn't happen. It will eventually kind of come back and impact your life. And so, and again, it's just offering, I think, it becomes really tricky because you're also dealing with people who are traumatized currently. And so, just for me, it was like in my tribe, just kind of offering space and that was non-judgmental, offering thoughts and ideas. When we first started presenting this work on the Yapoli project to our tribe, they weren't so keen on healing, on addressing historical trauma. And we were able to find kind of a key stakeholder in the community who happened to be the sister of the chief at the time. And she was really influential in helping us to kind of gain some inroads in the community. And she at the time was diagnosed with cancer, with terminal cancer, and she really wanted to leave a legacy of healing for her community. And so she really worked diligently with us to kind of help us to create a space where we could even just start to talk about that. And so I think that that's one of the recommendations that I have, is that we have to find those key people in the community who understand what historical trauma is, but also have that power to be able to create a space for us to start talking about and creating that healing.
Yeah, and I mean, this is Donica's area of specialty on trauma-informed care, and she's been working in it for a really long time. And I can just say from speaking from, I guess, some of my own personal experiences and talking with Danica, like being able to talk about these things is really empowering. And I think when you start to share about your experiences as a community and you start to talk about how trauma is impacting you, it can make you feel like you're less alone and you start to recognize some of the things that you're experiencing are actually like pretty common and pretty normal. And then you can start to figure out and what other people are doing and learn from them. And I don't know, I feel like it's, I don't know the words for it, but it's very, very powerful, and it can be incredibly helpful when you have people that are there to support this kind of work with the community.
Thank you.
There's a question in here about, it says, I have noticed a lot of developmental trauma in our populations, which makes it difficult to engage clients in treatment with barriers of trust, time management, consistency, with attendance. They say, I'm not native, would love to talk more with someone familiar with research of work around healing a developmental trauma for adults. So developmental and complex trauma become challenging to heal and work with because the trauma generally happened pre-verbal. So there's not kind of a database of memory that's attached to language. And so a lot of the healing and treatment around developing complex and developmental trauma or healing those traumas is really kind of based in experiential therapies like play therapy, sandbox therapy, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapies, and mindfulness. And one of the first things that we need to do is set up a safety plan for people to be able to deal with what we commonly understand as triggers, to be able to re-regulate their systems when they become triggered. And so a lot of this is around like mindfulness practices. One activity is box breathing, where you inhale for 5 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 6 seconds. And that process of box breathing regulates the brain systems and helps the brain oxygen come up to the brain and to regulate. Another activity is centering the person, getting someone grounded. And so you have them look in the room and identify things in the room, what they can smell, what they can touch, what they can taste, which helps regulate their symptoms so that they're able to better process the feelings and experiences around their traumas. So there are lots and lots of different ways to heal and process through trauma that have been shown to work. The thing is that it's a process. It's not a product. We don't. Takes a long time to deal with and heal trauma. We have to simultaneously help them develop skills to learn how to cope and deal with their trauma responses while simultaneously dealing with kind of cognitive issues and stuff like that. So it just takes time. And in this society where we want things to be treatment to happen in 8 convenient sessions, that's just not what happens. That's not what works. And so the other part of it too is that we have to simultaneously help them get the services and resources that they need to feel safe and secure in their life so that they can deal with the kind of cognitive and behavioral aspects of their healing. Are there any other thoughts or questions?
think that you guys might have gotten all the questions that I saw. We had lots of wonderful comments too.
Yeah.
Oh, someone raised their hand. Oh, Danielle, are you there? Danielle, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me? Can
Yeah,
you hear me?
go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. So
Yes.
the only thing I wanted to add to this is that I am on a board for the Lewis Clark Valley Resilience Coalition, and our coalition has been based around ACEs and better understanding of how we can communicate and have community outreach on the need for better understanding ACEs. So this year will be our second annual conference, and it's about with a focus on diversity. So as the only Native American on the board, I'm continuously saying, we really need to involve our Native American people for many reasons, but we're also just 11 miles away from a reservation. So where I'm going with that is that I would love to talk to somebody about perhaps their willingness to come to Idaho in August to do a presentation on just what we've been talking about at this conference. Last year was our first year, and we had about 200 people. We really expected 150. So we've really kind of blown the doors off of that just within the first year. So if anyone is interested in being a part of that or wanting to know more how they can attend the conference, I would love to just be able to chat about that.
Yeah, that would be great if you could send me an email. I would love to come and present. I do a lot of presentations in tribal communities.
Okay, was that
Wendy,
You have a.
was that
Sorry.
Monica? Who
I
was
was
that?
just going to ask you.
that was Daniela Scott.
And Danielle, do you have a website for the conference that you could share a link
Yes, I can do that.
in the chat?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, Daniela, just get in touch and please share your information.
Yes.
Thank you.
Does anybody
Well,
have
we
any?
might be wrapping up here. Yeah, please feel free to raise hands or submit more questions. I just wanted to, before more people drop off, I wanted to take a second to thank all of our presenters. This has been a really wonderful time spent together, and with such a heavy topic, it feels really special to be able to walk away from this with feeling so hopeful and encouraged that there's so many things that you have all done, and the work that you have seen, it just makes me feel really positive about where this issue is headed in the future. And I'm just so grateful that we have such wonderful, gifted practitioners as you to share with us. So I really wanted to take a moment to say thank you to Dr. Gardner and Dr. Love Brown and Dr. Boyd as well. It's just been a really great session, so thank you all.
Thanks for having us, Kate. We really enjoyed talking with you all. I just want to make sure, I know I can see Dr. Boyd still on the line. If anybody has any questions for Dr. Boyd, she's still here.
Yeah, please. And just really grateful for everyone taking the time to stay on and to share questions and comments. And there's been really a lot of great sharing and ideas that has been in the chat. So I'm going to try to pull together some of those resources and share those in the email that we send out following the presentation. So we've got a raised hand here. Kathy, you should be able to connect your microphone now, so let us know when you're ready. Oh, Thank you so much, Dr. Boyd. I might be able to unmute you here. Then you can.
Oh, technology.
Yeah. Let me see.
I think, Dr. Boyd, if you hover over your little name, it should let you unmute yourself. So if you can look up
Yeah, for some reason it won't let me unmute you right now, but
with your little picture.
yep. And otherwise, there should be a green microphone icon at the top that you can also click on. That should unmute you. Let's see. I think we might have lost the person who's going to ask a question. Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Boyd. Yeah, we really appreciated this session, and I'm just so glad it worked out to put these two sessions together. And yeah, again, for any of you who had trouble getting in or were told that it was full, I just thank you for your patience. This is obviously a topic that we need to spend more time on because it's clearly very meaningful. And so, yeah, I'm hoping we can offer more sessions like this. And of course, we'll share the recording. And yeah, I think we'll finish up and close out here. And yeah, I just want to ask, yeah, Dr. Gardner and Dr. Love Brown, if you wanted to say anything before we finish up.
No, I don't have anything to say. I just want to offer that if anyone has any questions or comments, you are welcome to email me at any time.
Same. Thank you for joining us today. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll just remind you all, as we close out, you should be redirected to a short survey. It takes just a couple minutes, and we actually have separate ones for each session. So the first one that you get directed to will be for the session with Dr. Boyd. You should see the title there. And then once you finish that one, it should actually send you on to the one for the second session. So we would really appreciate your feedback. And thanks again to all of you. It's really wonderful to be together and to see so many people who are committed to their communities and to helping those who are dealing with trauma. So I appreciate you, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.